You are Locked On Wolverines, your daily podcast on the Michigan Wolverines, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Happy Thursday. This is one of two Locked On Wolverines podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. I am your man on the ground, Isaiah Hole, publisher of Wolverines Wire. Super excited to bring on to return to our recurring deal that we have with Pro Football Focus of bringing in Anthony Treash, my favorite to converse with, always the best insight. Anthony, welcome once again. It's been a while, man.
Yeah, it has been. I'm ready to talk some Michigan football and college football in general. It feels good to be back.
Indeed, man. Well, the first thing that I want to get to is you were extremely bullish on Michigan at this time last year when no one else was. It might have taken a while for you to say, hey, they can contend with Ohio State. Obviously, we had to see some games for that to happen. You were one of the only people that were singing the praises of Aiden Hutchinson. I made the joke at the Club Greater Detroit event that I spoke at the other day that no one thought that Aiden was going to go as high as he did, but you probably did, actually. You were kind of one of the outliers, right? What is your overview of this Michigan football team as it's set to enter the 2022 season?
It's kind of the same. And, like you said a year ago, I thought they were going to be a very good football program, but it was just, could they get that difference maker? And obviously, if it was going to be anyone, it looked like it would be Aiden Hutchinson, but asking someone on defense to kind of carry that load is pretty significant, right? But he just happened to be in that rare bunch where I really think you could probably count on one hand over the last 5 years or so of like pure game wreckers at the edge position in college football. And he definitely classified as that. And that's good enough to get you to where Michigan got last year. So I look at this team right now and I don't see any Aiden Hutchinsons defensively. It's going to be a good group, but I don't see that. But on offense, you do see some, high ceiling talent there, right? That could be those difference makers on offense that can kind of get them over that hump. And I always go back to the quarterback position that's still king, whether it's college or pro. If you have a difference maker at quarterback, you're going to go far as long as everything else is in, at least at an average level. And for Michigan, it's well above average at every other group. And so it goes to Cade McNamara and JJ McCarthy. What happens there? And, I think there's plenty of reason to be pretty bullish with what Michigan has to offer for this upcoming season, because I've talked about JJ McCarthy a lot. I really do think that he is going to be a star for the Wolverines eventually, whether it's, week 2 or middle of the season, late in the season, or 2023. I think it's bound to happen. It's just a matter of when. And so I think that just kind of adds to the intrigue with this team. And, if JJ McCarthy can kind of get to that level I think he can get at sooner rather than later, I mean, it's going to shake some stuff up, not just in the Big Ten, but also in the playoff.
And you know what, you're already the polar opposite of. I had not to defame him at all, but he was a wonderful guest. But we had Mike Golick Jr. on yesterday, and he was just very like, Michigan's going to be all right. It's like they're going to be okay. But no, they're not at all in the same stratosphere. They don't have any difference makers. Their defense is going to be trash. He maybe didn't go that far, but you know what I mean? But that kind of is even though Michigan's ranked 6th and 8th in the coaches and the AP polls, but it does seem like the overall kind of national purview of Michigan is it ain't going to be that great. It might be okay. We'll see. The schedule is really easy, so therefore it very well might still work out. But you mentioned the offense. Who else do you have your eye on outside of that quarterback? Because obviously Michigan's got an incredibly deep skill position scenario when it comes to both wide receivers and the running backs.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pick a spot to begin because there's just so many of them, right? I mean, you could reasonably say that they have, 4 or 5 players, skill position weapons that could be like a first team all Big Ten type of talent with, Blake Corum at running back. You have Donovan Edwards, who's one of the better receiving backs in the country. You have AJ Henning, who's just kind of that, get him the ball in his hands on scheme touches and let him go to work type of guy. Eric All, who's just the definition of an all-around tight end, one of the best blockers at the position, but he's also a dangerous receiver. You have Ronnie Bell coming back from injury. If he can kind of get to the level he was, then, I mean, you add it to that entire group, and you could add multiple other guys to that too. I mean, there's just so much talent there. It's kind of hard to, no matter who the quarterback is. I think even if, like, let's say hypothetically, like Cade McNamara starts this entire season, there's just so much talent around him that I would be shocked if they didn't win at least 10. It's just getting over that hump to get to that playoff level is where it gets interesting. But, like I said, there's just so much talent there. And Blake Corum, I think, is probably the best of the bunch there. I really do think with his speed, it's a difference maker, right? I mean, he can create above expectation too. He can break tackles. It's what you really want to see there. And so you could, any way you want to shape it, there's just too much talent there to kind of see the offense falter a little bit. I mean, there's plenty of difference makers there. I like Michael Jr. Love him, conversed with him a few times. Very smart guy with football. But yeah, I would probably respectfully disagree on Michigan because I think there's plenty of difference makers really on either side of the ball too. Like defensively, you're going to expect to step back from what they were, just given the level of production they had last year was unprecedented in some ways. But there's still plenty of guys there, right? That's still going to make this at least a above average group. And if you have an above average defense and your offense kind of gets close to that ceiling, that's all you really need.
Now, one of the things that I've been just hammering home all off season here, and but before I even get to that, just with Golic, it's hard to cover essentially 131 teams. It's if you're not laser focused on, like you guys, you are laser focused on 131, but when you're just kind of one guy going around, it can sometimes be a little bit difficult, right? We see that year in, year out. But one of the things I've really been hammering home is group production for the defense. Last year, as good as it was, as good as the defense was, as game-wrecking as both Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo were, that was still actually Michigan's second worst sack production overall as a team. But that's probably because in the Jim Harbaugh era, that is. And that's because generally it is very much more by committee. You look back at years like 2018, where I think the leading sacker had 6 and Josh Uche. It's not necessarily always, you're not always going to have a singular talent that's just unblockable the way Michigan did. That said, while it is expected to be by committee this year, is there anyone you kind of have your eye on defensively that you think like that potentially could be maybe not an Aiden Hutchinson, but a David Ojabo? And it could be across any position in the sense of this is not a guy that everyone's necessarily focused on, but some things start to go right early season. We could, at the end of the year, be talking about them in a similar vein.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think Mazi Smith is the one. And of course, like every Michigan fan knows who Mazi is. And, but it's the kind of the deep cut college football fans that only know who he is nationally. He's not necessarily a prized name. I mean, more people knew who Aiden Hutchinson was at this point last year than Mazi Smith, I think, nationwide. He's one where I think he could possibly become a true superstar in the collegiate ranks. I think he has that kind of, level of production. I think just from a pure production standpoint, returning wise, he's definitely one of the top guys defensively, but I do think that he's really just scratching the surface and he can really take that next step forward. So I would probably say him, even though, again, a lot of Michigan fans obviously know who he is. They know he's going to be great, but nationwide, not a lot of people know who he is. I expect that to change. And of course, he's a freak athlete. We saw the list. I mean, he can be that kind of guy. I'm also intrigued with, and I may butcher his name, but Eyabi Anoma.
Yeah, I think we haven't really gotten a specific pronunciation, but like I've said Eyabi, I've said Eyabi. So Anoma, we know that part. That's the common denominator with his name.
Yeah, for sure. And he's just interesting because I was talking with Mike Ritter, the lead draft analyst here, like a few months ago about him. He's at UT Martin, former 5-star recruit. You see he's a former 5-star recruit, has been at multiple colleges now at this point, Alabama, Houston, then UT Martin. And you could be like, well, okay, keep an eye on him this season at UT Martin, see what he does. And then all of a sudden he's in the portal again. What's going on there? And then he ends up in Michigan just a few days later. And, we'll see what happens with him. But he's just kind of one to keep an eye on, just given, we know how it could be a little bit different. Of course, you lose Sean Nua there, but, Michigan's been pretty good at developing the position. And you have a guy that's just a little bit raw, but you can see the flashes there of what he can be. And if he can be productive for him on the edge, that adds another element there. And I think when you have that athleticism out there, it can kind of open some things up. So he's definitely one that I keep an eye on. But yeah, those are kind of the two guys that I really think that, like, are very much intriguing me defensively. I think Mozzie, like I said, is going to be a superstar. I think DJ Turner, cornerback, is also great. I wouldn't be surprised if he also gets to that level. I would almost put him in the same camp as Mozzie. Everybody at Michigan knows him. The deep cut college football diehards, they know who he is. But nationwide, it's not a household name yet. But I think, him and Mozzie could get there.
It's kind of fun with a guy like DJ Turner, or I just remember 2019, him being a freshman and him just kind of mugging for the camera after special teams plays in which he was just kind of, running downfield and stuff like that. To see that come up in moments like that is it's kind of fun to see a guy finally get his time in the spotlight. What are your thoughts on Mike Morris? I have to ask that. And again, you can plead the fifth on this. If you don't really have any kind of strong opinions, but he's a guy that now Jim Harbaugh isn't necessarily prone to hyperbole, but every now and again, he'll say something that comes across that way. And this is coming out of spring. He talking about Mike Morris said, well, he could be just like Aiden Hutchinson, but what do you remember from his play last year? And do you see any glimpse of him stepping up in that type of direction?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of took those comments and it took me back a little bit. Man, I need to go back and watch Mike Morris again. So I did. And I was like, maybe this is like an instilling confidence type of thing. Now, hopefully he gets to that level. That would be great for Michigan, obviously. And, I always root for players to get to that level, but I don't think I wouldn't bet on it. I don't think he's going to really come close to that kind of level. I mean, he was just a rather, unproductive player last year. Granted, wasn't a full-time guy, but I mean, when we did see him on the field, I mean, his pressure rate generated was, probably, I think like 7% or something like that. It's not what you really want to see in a limited action. And you never did see those high level moments. And even with some of those guys that really don't see the field a lot, they're not full-time guys, and you're just seeing a little bit of them. You never want to expect him to just go out there and you're like, oh, that guy's a star. You just need to get him on the field more. But you just want to see just a little bit, just a little bit of juice out there that you could be like, okay, this guy could be it. And, Aiden Hutchinson's one from the get-go. You did see that. You're like, okay, this is someone to keep an eye on. But with Mike Morris, we just really didn't see that, in my opinion. Things change. We see it all the time happen, just these unknown breakouts. But I would be, just given what we have seen on the field, I would be a little surprised if he did kind of even come close to that Aiden Hutchinson level. But again, it would be awesome for him, obviously, and it would be awesome for Michigan if he did.
I just realized I asked you that sometime in the spring. As soon as you started talking, I remembered that came back to me. I want to switch gears here for the last couple minutes here, but one of the things, and you can vehemently disagree with me on this, and you probably will, actually. And it's not that I'm stating a fact. I'm not even fully stating an opinion. But the last couple of days, I've been talking about Ohio State. And while I do expect them to beat Notre Dame, because I have questions about Notre Dame, the reason why I have my eye on Ohio State, aside from the rivalry and all of that, is that I find that in some ways they're in a similar predicament as Michigan, in that new defensive coordinator, lots of unknowns as far as playmakers on the defensive side of the ball, replacing a lot more offensive talent. And yet they get this benefit of the doubt that, oh, no, it's going to be great. What I've been constantly saying is like, oh, Ohio State's defense is going to be great. Why? Well, they got a new defensive coordinator. Michigan's defense isn't going to be very good. Why? Well, they got a new defensive coordinator. It's this kind of weird dichotomy. Granted, that's not apples to apples there, but what are your thoughts on Ohio State? Is there any chance they do stay either at the level they were last year, or even maybe take a step back at all?
Yeah, I love that question, because I do think that's something that a lot of people aren't talking enough about. Like Jim Knowles, the new defensive coordinator for Ohio State, came over from Oklahoma State. Definitely one of the best defensive minds in the country. And his track record's phenomenal. Just what he did at Oklahoma State and then at Duke before that. I mean, he shows he can change some stuff around. And, the defense that they're going to be running, And this is where I think it could be, I guess, a little, hairy from time to time. Maybe it could cause some trouble. It's just so different from what they're used to. And even at the NFL level, like when players change teams or coaches change teams and, players have to get acclimated to new systems and schemes, it can be difficult, right? At the collegiate level, it's incredibly difficult. And I think this year's just, in college football in general, we're going to get a good look at just a good case study of like all of these transfers. How do they fare in these new systems, right? It could be a little bit more difficult than some people think. And I think there's a chance for Ohio State that it could be a little bit more difficult, right? Maybe they're kind of the same defense that they were last year, even though stylistically it's different. Like I said, they're just a static single high team. They would just typically say to the offense, what we're going to run, but we're still going to beat you because we have better players. But once you have the Bosa's out of there, the Chase Youngs and Jeff Okuda's out of there, and you still have very talented players, don't get me wrong, but you just don't have those different game records, generational type of players. You can't do that. This one's going to be a completely different defense, very deceptive. They're going to try and catch the offense off guard, but that could lead to mistakes with a lot of guys that don't know the system. And they brought in Tanner McAllister, who's going to be kind of that third safety in the 3 safety defense, going to be manning a slot too, from Oklahoma State, who has a wealth of experience in this defense. And, he's a good player, but, honestly, the biggest thing he brings is just knowledge of the defense and kind of coach up some of these players too. But again, that's just one of, 11 people out there. So I think it could be a little difficult for him. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see some inconsistencies there. They were middle of the pack in the Power 5 last year in virtually every defensive metric that at least we kind of value here. And I wouldn't be too surprised if they're there. I don't know if they're going to get back to that elite level, that top 5 or even top 10 group. So I do think it could be an average to slightly above average group again. And at that point, you just need the offense to kind of, reach that ceiling. But again, last year, CJ Stroud's a great quarterback, but, he wasn't a flawless product week in and week out, right? You can point to Minnesota, you can point to Oregon, you can point to Nebraska, you can point to the Michigan. Those 4 games, he had some pretty serious issues. Now, if you just you throw all those games out, you just watch Michigan State and Utah in the Rose Bowl, you'd think he's the best quarterback ever. But, you look at the full course of the season, you see some inconsistencies there. And, I think for me, it's just for him, just getting a little bit more comfortable out there, right? If things don't go according to plan, just staying a little bit more composed. And of course, just staying consistent with his mechanics and just really hone in on the accuracy aspect, because there were times where he was inaccurate and, it didn't lose him games, but it definitely played a part, right? Especially that Oregon game. He wasn't the reason they lost, but, he wasn't, completely off the card there to be blamed. So we'll see what happens. I don't think losing Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, I don't think that's that big of a deal, just because I think Jackson Smith and Jigba might be better than them. And I think Marvin Harrison Jr. has a chance to be, maybe the second best wide receiver in college football behind him. I think he's a special talent. Travion Henderson's great. The offensive line's in good shape. But it's just, can that offense consistently be elite? And I think that's where, you look at this situation. It's like, well, if you want to be a college football playoff team, you're going to have to get close to that level if your defense is kind of the same as what it was. So I don't think it's as much of a slam dunk. I think they're the second best team in college football, but I think they're a little bit closer to a team like Michigan than a lot of people are saying.
Now, last one for you, because you mentioned something that I really wanted to ask you about, and that is because you mentioned that you think their offensive line is in great shape. I see a lot of, those preseason things that you see coming out of, here's ranking this, here's ranking that. I've seen 2 different, and I don't even remember where they're from. I don't know how reputable they are. Not that any kind of opinion piece in the offseason tells you any kind of story other than this is what people are thinking. But I saw 2 separate offensive line rankings. Both of them had Ohio State at number 1, Michigan at number 3, which I found kind of weird because Michigan, with the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, adding Oluwatimi to its ranks versus a team that I think is still going to be really good, but loses Nick Petit-Frere, Thayer Mumford, and all of a sudden they're a lot better. Could you shine some light on why maybe some people are thinking that? What is your thought about that overall?
Yeah, it's just the star power, right? And you're projecting a lot of breakouts there. Like you have, Paris Johnson, he's moving over from guard to tackle, and tackle's more of his natural position. And, he could end up being one of the top prospects in his respective draft class. He's that good just from a tools perspective. Donovan Jackson, 5-star recruit stepping in at guard, taking over Paris Johnson's spot. Matthew Jones, kind of expecting him. He's been there for a little bit, not so much experience despite that, but, maybe he can take a step forward. And I think a lot of I see the love with DeJuan Jones. I think, heck, I had him as a top 5 returning tackle in the country, but not to say he doesn't have some deficiencies there. I think really at the offensive line, heck, I would have put BYU first. I think that's the best offensive line in college football first and foremost, but Ohio State's definitely up there. I think, again, so they're in good shape, but that's not to say there's not, some vulnerabilities, right? I thought last year's offensive line was in good shape for Ohio State, even though a lot of people thought it stinked. But I think, overall for the course of the season, they're not going to have any issues. It's just when they play the big dogs, that's when you can start to point out okay, how does this group really look? So I like it when they're playing Indiana, for example, right? I think this offensive line is going to absolutely cook over there. But it's when you play some of the teams with just high power defensive lines. Like if they play Alabama in the playoff, for example, that's when it's going to get interesting. I think it's going to get interesting even this weekend against Notre Dame, right? Because you have Isaiah Foskey there. I think Paris Johnson's really going to be a special tackle for him, but DeJuan Jones is more of a run blocker, right? And so I think with someone like Isaiah Foskey, I think he could possibly expose him. He's just with somebody DeJuan Jones is the largest starter in college football. There's no one starting for any team that is bigger than this man. He's 6'9", 360, whatever it is. That's going to lead to some leverage issues from time to time, right? You're just so high cut, and at the same time, you're not going to be as nimble, and that's going to lead to some issues against the cream of the crop, the first round type of talents like an Isaiah Foskey. So I think that's where it gets interesting. So I think this is a good group. I think they're probably on par with some group like Michigan. I would say they're close to the best. Both of them are close to the best. BYU, I think, still takes the cake, but it's not just because it's hard to find good offensive line play in college football because that's the position we see it in the NFL. It's just so hard to develop. It's just reps. You just, that's all you need. It's just a bunch of reps really to get there. Good coaching. You just need high level, just toolsy guys in there to kind of get to that level. So, there's always, I think with every single offensive line, it's hard to pick one BYU if I'm being honest, but every other offensive line in college football, there's you can never count on them on every single week. They're just going to blank the opponent. You're just not going to see that in college football because these guys are still young. They're raw. They just need a lot more developed because if you threw any of these guys on an NFL field on Sunday, it's going to be a rough ride for them. And we see it with all the top premier picks every single year. Andrew Thomas, for example, Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell, they're kind of the exception to that because those are freaks of nature. But again, it's a good group. It's like Michigan, but that's not to say you can't count on them every single week because when you face those first round guys like a Foskey, like an Anderson, it's maybe you'll see some vulnerabilities crack.
Well, that's a wealth of knowledge. I'm so prepared. I feel like everyone's going to feel so much more prepared. I'd love to get the rivalry aspects in just to kind of get an idea of what someone like you is thinking about them on top of what you think about Michigan. So anything to promote right now? Do you have anything new that you guys are working on?
We have a new PFF app. That's pretty exciting. Over in the App Store, just type in PFF. You can download that if you're a fantasy nut. If you love to get, sports betting, gambling, it's the best resource out there. I got a fantasy draft tonight. Actually, I'm going to be using it to, check in on the rankings of some of our top fantasy guys. So definitely that's the thing to check out. We got a lot of exciting stuff on the horizon. That's one of our big whales that we're really, really excited about. So check that out in the App Store.
Awesome. I definitely will. So Anthony, thank you so much for joining us. It's Anthony Treash from Pro Football Focus. Again, this was a one-off special episode. I think it's the first time we've done it this way, but we will be back with the Michigan mailbag. So by the time that you hear or see this, that will be done. So don't get your questions in. Thank you for watching and or listening. Peace.